Hey everyone, my name is Allie Dameron. I am thrilled to be here to guide you through a few of these different trainings to really educate and empower you on your health. That is my biggest goal in my own virtual business, and I'm excited to provide you some of that today. So, a little bit about me. I am in the Denver, Colorado area, although I have a virtual business. My name is Allie Dameron, and I am a women's hormone expert and treat women all the way from our teenage girls all the way through postmenopause. So I work a lot on things like anxiety, insomnia, sleep issues, gut health, and all the different hormonal things from PCOS to perimenopause to PMS to even some of our postmenopausal women who are dealing with bone health issues or any of the stuff like hot flashes, anxiety, any of those issues that plague us after we go through the transition of perimenopause. So today what I thought we would do is I thought we would go through this really buzzy term called perimenopause. Even a few short years ago, we were not talking about perimenopause. We used maybe the word menopause when we were sort of going through this transition, and you were in maybe your late 40s or early 50s, and that was really kind of like the terminology for it. But the internet always has different trends and buzzy things and all sorts of things. And so now we are calling it its correct name, which is called perimenopause. And perimenopause is defined anywhere from 2 to 12 years before you go through menopause. Menopause is defined as 1 year without a period, so that is 1 day, and then you are considered postmenopausal. So this idea of perimenopause, again, the internet is talking about it. It's really, really popular, which is honestly so great for us because women deserve to have these things talked about. For so many decades until this point, this transition was shoved under the rug, and there's a lot of research that shows all of these insane numbers about how disregarded women have been in this sort of transitionary phase of life. But one of the ones that stands out the most to me is that a woman has an average of 6 doctor's visits to be diagnosed with perimenopause. And one of the reasons for that, or a few of the reasons, is because number one, there is not a uniformity of symptoms. So typically in Western medicine, when you're being diagnosed with a syndrome or an illness or a disease, you have sort of like the same symptoms, right, of something, and everyone sort of fits mostly in that sort of box. But in perimenopause, it doesn't. Some women skate through it just fine and barely notice. Other women have even like debilitating type of symptoms. And so we're going to talk about what those can be and the different stages of it in this video. And so the lack of uniformity of symptoms is one big thing for perimenopause. The other big thing about perimenopause is that unfortunately there is not a blood test to really diagnose it, right? So we can start to look at lab work, which I'll talk about, and see like, okay, estrogen is certain levels, your follicle stimulating hormone, which is another marker, or luteinizing hormone, or things like that have shifted or are different ranges, which we can start to see. But there's no definitive lab value that says, yes, you're positive for perimenopause. And so because of that, and because of the fluctuation of hormones, as we'll learn through perimenopause, becomes a little bit more difficult to diagnose, but that is not an excuse to not have it diagnosed. So I really want to preface this video first with saying we can diagnose perimenopause. Every single one of us that's born with a uterus is going to go through this transition of life. And so that is 51% of the population if we all live that long, hopefully so. And so we can diagnose it, we can treat it. And most of all, it should be treated. And we're going to talk about that when we specifically get into the later stages of perimenopause. But perimenopause symptoms should be treated to reduce your risk of disease as we age. And some of those more age-related diseases such as high cholesterol, high blood sugar, osteoporosis, cognitive decline, or Alzheimer's or dementia. A lot of these things are due to lack of estrogen, in which we have tools and tips and things to do to help really prevent a lot of these diseases and really reduce your risk of them. So I'm excited for this. I'm totally here for this. I love treating perimenopause. It's one of my very favorite things to talk about because so many women are struggling with it. And like I said, we've come from an era and a generation before us that just unfortunately silently suffered through it, and we have arrived, and I think a lot of us have made the decision that we felt too good before this and we want to continue to feel good. Our 40s and 50s is much too early in life to sort of wave the white flag of feeling good, and we want to continue the party going. So I want to get into what first are the 3 stages of perimenopause. So the first stage is called early perimenopause. And like I mentioned before, perimenopause is defined anywhere between 2 to 12 years before menopause. So if you are even in your mid to late 30s, listen up. You're probably going to start experiencing, maybe even very subtly, some of these quick changes, or some of these things that can change relatively early. And then we kind of go into mid perimenopause and then the late stages of perimenopause. So in the early stages, you again might be in your mid to late 30s, early 40s somewhere, and it's going to be subtle. You're going to start to notice just like a few different symptoms that are different, right? So maybe your periods are starting to change, where you used to have this nice 30-day cycle, maybe they get to be 28 days, and then maybe a 26-day cycle, and then maybe they're changing blood quality for you. So maybe you're noticing, heavier, crampier, clottier. Maybe you only had breast tenderness when you were a teenager, and now you're starting to have it again at this age. Acne, adult onset acne can happen, and perimenopause can be one of the reasons. Maybe you're noticing worsening moods before your period, where if your partner breathes, you want to strangle them, or you have no patience, no peace of calm with your kids, you're feeling more anxious, you're noticing your sleep habits are changing before your period, where you're noticing kind of more restless sleep those few days or weeks before your period starts. These are some of the very earliest signs of perimenopause. And a lot of us, I think in this age group, sort of feel mostly okay. And again, I want to sort of say that hormones impact life, and life impacts hormones. So when we're talking about hormones in general, I want you to think about it as a pyramid. The foundation of this pyramid is going to be insulin, your blood sugar hormone, cortisol, which is a part of our circadian rhythm, but also stress, and adrenaline, which is that fight or flight response. If those 3 things are not in a great place, then everything sort of up the chain is going to be a little bit more difficult to get into a good place, for example. So if you're ultra stressed and sort of going through perimenopause, likely that's going to make your experience of perimenopause a little bit more symptomatic. Whereas if you, in your 30s somewhere started really managing stress well and taking really great care of yourself, eating nutrient-dense foods, doing the strength training, all of those things, you have kind of set the stage to have a slightly easier run at it in perimenopause. And again, these are not the only factors that go into how you're going to experience perimenopause. There are also, genetic things and just biochemical things in our body that can change this. But I always am a fan of setting ourselves up for success. So in this early stage of perimenopause, when you start to see things shifting, a lot of women are just kind of like, it's not that big of a deal. And it only happens, once a month, once a cycle. And so we sort of tend to forget about it for the other 3 weeks until it kind of comes on again. And we're like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. My breasts are tender. I'm not sleeping great. My mood's not great. I'm having like shorter or longer cycles, things like that. Maybe you're having some night sweats before your period starts. These are things that are pretty fairly easy because they're not happening that often to kind of sweep under the rug. But I promise you that if we start to see patterns with our menstrual cycle, specifically in this stage of like 2 to 3 that are really consistently changing, let's start doing something about it. So in this early stage of perimenopause, basically what's happening from a hormonal standpoint is your estrogen level is going all over the place. And that's kind of what perimenopause is defined, right, as hormonal imbalance. So we tend to think of perimenopause as our estrogen and progesterone, which are 2 major hormones of the menstrual cycle, kind of just linearly like decreasing like this. But this is what actually happens. We go up and down and all around, and then at the end, it sort of gets a little bit less and then down for good. And so at the beginning, instead of our estrogen actually being lower, our estrogen actually can get higher, which can create heavier, crampier, clottier periods, shorter cycles, worsening PMS symptoms, acne, that period flu. Any of these things are due to an excess of estrogen in relation to progesterone. We need these two to be in a good ratio because our good friend progesterone has to oppose estrogen. So progesterone, think about that hormone as progestation, and it's just kind of quietly exiting the stage. It's like, maybe we're kind of done doing this here soon in the next few years, few decades, whatever, or decade. And so that level is kind of decreasing. Stress decreases it faster, and your estrogen is doing this. So treatment principles, if we can metabolize your estrogen well, meaning that getting that estrogen through your body, out of it, and supporting progesterone, that will help those early perimenopausal symptoms significantly. There's different ways to do this, but this is what I work on with my patients all the time in finding the best ways to do this. And I'm going to kind of talk about treatment principles at the end. Mid-perimenopause is progression of symptoms, right? So this might be somewhere in your mid to late 40s type of a place where you're definitely noticing a progression in heavier menstrual flow. Some women unfortunately go through like flooding where they can't leave their house. And if you're having flooding menstrual flow, we need to also rule out some other things, which again is why sometimes this diagnosis of simply perimenopause can take some time. We want to make sure there's not a fibroid in there. We want to make sure your thyroid's okay. We want to make sure your iron level, actually low iron or anemia, can actually contribute to heavy periods. Heavy periods contribute to anemia. So there are some different things that we want to make sure are happening or not happening when we're assessing a heavy menstrual cycle. In my opinion, almost always, we can holistically figure out a heavy menstrual cycle and get your hormones balanced or your thyroid or your iron or whatever we need to lighten up those cycles without doing something like a hysterectomy. That is not evidence-based anymore and really reserved for last case scenario type of things or, certain types of cancer. And so in this perimenopause, this mid-perimenopause, you might have a little bit of hot flashes starting and your periods are just going to get more irregular, right? So some women will experience 17-day menstrual cycles sometimes, and then 30, and then 25, and then 40, all over the place. And that's this fluctuation of cycle to cycle, your estrogen being high. Those short cycles are high estrogen. Those long cycles tend to be lower levels of estrogen. And you're kind of just doing this. And so again, we can absolutely treat this, get you comfortable. I always say, so the good internet likes to say to balance your hormones. And in perimenopause, especially this mid to late stage, the definition is kind of an imbalance of hormones, but that doesn't mean that you have to be miserable. So I want to just encourage you that if you're here and this is what you're dealing with, there's a lot of considerations here, some lifestyle factors. Like I said, we want to make sure your insulin's okay and your stress is okay and your thyroid and all of that stuff's fine because hormones can shift those things as well. And then if that is all good, then we really want to work on, again, really metabolizing that estrogen and really, most of all, supporting your progesterone level. Supporting progesterone through perimenopause is absolutely key. And then stage 3 becomes late perimenopause. And this is where we are nearing the end of our menstrual cycles. And I haven't given any sort of time frames for these because it is a little subjective of like exactly what stage you're in. And it also is a little all over the place, right? So some people are in late perimenopause for most of the time, a couple of years, because the transition to menopause is 1 year without a period. And so until you sort of reach that point, you're in that late perimenopause. But even a couple of years before that, you might have had 6 months without a cycle or 8 months or 3 months. And then it might have come, 2 in a row regular, how it used to be. This is kind of what happens. And this is sort of that decline or decrease in estrogen to where you are noticing low levels. So I would say estrogen is sort of like an energy supplement. It's cooling, it's moisturizing, it's lubricating. And so when we lose it, I call the symptoms kind of like the hot, dry symptoms, right? So we can start to get lower energy, joint pain, hot flashes, night sweats, muscle pain, does not feel quite as lubricated in our joints. We can start to notice like jaw issues or teeth issues or frozen shoulder or any of kind of like the hot, dry, so vaginal dryness, any of those different types of things. And there's a lot of other ones as well. So if you're kind of in this stage and you've had some weird symptoms pop up, there's a good chance it could be related to estrogen. Could it be related to something else, like in the case of autoimmune disease? Sure, but we do know that even with autoimmune disease, there's an uptick in this time of life when there are big hormonal fluctuations, which tend to be in late perimenopause or menopause. And so in this time, what we're basically doing is we're supporting estrogen, we're supporting progesterone, and working through the symptoms that you might be having. At this point in the game, this tends to be a place that a lot of women will look at estrogen hormone replacement therapy. Like I said, progesterone hormone replacement therapy can be looked at a bit earlier if you want to. And I have to say, with the HRT conversation, it's a super nuanced conversation. There's not a right or wrong answer for everybody. It can be extremely beneficial, and some people do not have a great risk profile for it. And so we would need to use more nutritional or lifestyle or supplemental type of approaches, which absolutely are great. My entire career has been built upon the fact that HRT was dangerous. Now we are debunking that and learning all of the positive benefits. But for most of my career, HRT has been out, and so we have really all collectively learned other ways to treat perimenopause and menopause, if that is not something that you want to embark upon. So in this sort of thing, I always say this, you guys, every time that I go through any sort of training, whether it's gut health or even like dental stuff, like my kids had some dental stuff a couple months ago, and the dentist said the same thing about nutrition or perimenopause or PMS or fertility, like anywhere that you are, the same basic things apply, right? So nutrient dense foods, whole food nutrition. I know you guys all talk about this all of the time, and it is really beneficial. Our bodies need those minerals, need those vitamins, need the amino acids. And so if we can follow more of a whole food nutrition type of diet, that will absolutely serve you super well in terms of just setting the foundations of healthy insulin response, healthy blood sugar, healthy lipid profiles, and giving your body the nutrients that it needs to really work through perimenopause well. Also, things like strength training are great for hormones, so it can boost your human growth hormone, which is anti-aging. It can boost your testosterone level. It helps to create more insulin sensitivity, which will help your perimenopause and metabolic profiles, including body composition. It helps to do almost everything for us. So strength training is absolutely imperative, especially as we lean into that area of, or that era of late perimenopause to menopause, where that estrogen used to create a lot of insulin sensitivity for us. Estrogen helps that, and we lose it, then our muscle mass can help that. So you really want to, as early as you can, start strength training and building that muscle. I would highly recommend doing that. It will serve you so well. There's so many studies that show aging and all of that stuff fare much better with higher muscle mass. So highly recommend that. Getting your NEAT activity in, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, meaning walking, moving, fidgeting, just being active. It doesn't have to be, necessarily like formal power walks all the time, but just being active where you're sitting, standing, where you're standing, pacing, or swaying. Try to just, I know it's hard sometimes to fit all of these things in, but if we can just start somewhere with being consistent in some movement and then sort of like, getting a little bit better and better as we go, I think that's ideal. That's certainly how I did it in my life. And I always say this to people, Rome was not built in one day. So start somewhere and then just continue to kind of keep adding things and doing better. And it will absolutely help your transition from perimenopause to postmenopause, and also decrease your risk of age-related or menopausal type of diseases as we age. Stress management is imperative. If our cortisol level and our nervous system or adrenaline is constantly spewing and your brain's all over the place and your body doesn't feel safe in your world and you're living off of stress hormones, you're going to have worse hot flashes. You're going to have more insulin resistance. You're going to have less sleep and more sleepless nights. You're going to have lower energy levels. Your brain fog could be worse. Your anxiety, all the different things that we talk about in terms of symptoms can be made worse by cortisol dysregulation and stress. So figure out ways to counterbalance that by leisure walking or reading or baths or connection or time in nature. It doesn't matter what you're doing as long as it's eliciting this response of self-care. Try to use non-technology ways to do it. Technology is a bit of a false sort of sense of self-care. It feels like self-care when we're scrolling our phones, but unfortunately, it's not quite doing the job that we want in terms of chemically our cortisol and adrenaline levels kind of coming down. Really work on mindset in terms of not catastrophizing and mind reading and perfectionism and people pleasing. And I realize that might be the job of a therapist, but those sort of personality characteristics can really increase your cortisol level. I know that's me, and it's something that I work on all the time. So I think, those are all the basic things. Sleeping, making sure that you're prioritizing your sleep and going to bed for, ideally 7 to 8 hours is great. And then from there, we sort of look at what symptoms you're experiencing, what do your genetics look like, what risk factors do you have, and we come up with a treatment plan. And that can be anything from, like I said, early perimenopause is treated differently than late perimenopause. So in early, we really want to detox that estrogen. And I don't want to give individual medical advice, but with herbs like things like DIM, calcium D-glucarate, some of these detoxifying herbs can be really helpful. Things like Vitex or chaste tree berry, things like vitamin E, maca root, these are great herbs to kind of boost progesterone. I'm going to say this now because it's important to notify you guys this. Don't just go on to the internet and buy the hormone balancing supplement. It's a blend usually of all of these different herbs that I'm mentioning, and we have no idea what the dose of them are in that product. And B, you're all unique. You all need different things. And sometimes when we just take the hormone balancing formula, we are not targeting your unique issue. We're not using therapeutic dosing. Sometimes if you have low estrogen and you're taking DIM, for example, or something with it in it, it can make your hot flashes worse. So I really encourage you at this point, if you're doing all the lifestyle, the stress, the food, the working out, strength training, you're doing all that right, and you're still really struggling with hormonal symptoms and want some more support there, please work with somebody who is very well educated in HRT and herbs and supplements, in sort of alternative therapies, things like that can give you a really holistic approach at how to treat this in a way that feels good to you and in a way that is evidence-based and will work. So I think those are great things for early. And then late, we can use things like evening primrose oil or black cohosh or rhubarb, or there's a million other herbs on the market that can be helpful for hot flashes and night sweats and vaginal dryness and insomnia and low energy and all the kind of like late perimenopausal type of symptoms. And then there's always the conversation once you get into low estrogen, adding a little estrogen. Once you know you have low progesterone, adding a little progesterone or testosterone. You want to make sure that you're getting lab tested and you know for sure that you are low in those numbers and need some replacement. But those things can also be very beneficial to a lot of women. Not a magic bullet for sure. I always say that HRT or hormone replacement therapy is not an or situation, it's an and. So you guys are all doing great in your nutrition, your strength training, your walking, macro tracking, all of those different things, but it's an and. You have to keep doing that and add HRT if you feel like you're a good candidate. So I hope this was helpful. I think it's confusing to realize what exactly perimenopause is. How do you know if you are actually in perimenopause? That's always confusing for a lot of women. I get that question most every day. So I hope this provided a little bit more clarification for you guys, and you guys got some answers that you need.